Hello, my friends. Jerry Rosa here in the Rosa String Works Workshop. Let me turn on my light. I forgot to do that. I don't know if that's better or worse. You may not like it. I don't know. Anyway, it's warmed up here a little bit on in the shop today, or outside, I should say. It's in the 40s versus the 20s, and I'm thankful for that. I really am. That's a little less wood. It looks like Zappa made it on here first this morning. He's always in the comments, and he's from the St. Louis area, I know. George French is from Massachusetts, and he's number 2. Humidifying instruments is what I want to talk about first. And, you've heard me get on that rant a billion times, but I just want to say it again because I don't think you can say it too often on what I'm about to say. It's not going to be a big rant. Don't get worried. 45 viewers already. That's good. The thing about humidifying instruments is, I'm on the side where you don't really need to humidify them unless you're under extreme conditions. I say keep the instrument in the conditions that you live in, and you should be fine. In other words, if your house is normally, heated, normally cooled, and normally humidified, your instrument should be fine. But even if you still want to humidify it, that's up to you. But just hear this one thing. Hear this one thing. Do not misunderstand this. Do not read between the lines and think I have some hidden alternative motive, because if you stop and think about it, I couldn't possibly have any motive other than just to try to be helpful. And that's what I'm trying to be. Do not, under any circumstances, use those chemical humidifiers. In other words, they come in a packet and you put them inside your instrument, or you hang them down through the strings in bags and things like that. Anything that's got anything that's pre-contained, if it comes with something inside this container, do not use them. And why do I say that? And the reason I say it is because I've had a couple of customers come in here recently. I'm not going to mention any names, and I'm not even going to say when they came in, but within the last month or so, I've had a couple of different customers come in, and I've seen them using these humidifiers, the chemical type. And the reason I say don't use that type, use some other type. If you feel like you have to do it, use some other type. But do not use the chemical ones, because they will eventually leak into your instrument and they will destroy things. I promise you, I've seen that at least a couple dozen times over the years. It's not uncommon for them to start leaking, and the chemical that's in there is some nasty stuff, let me tell you. And it makes a mess inside your instrument. So the reason I'm mentioning it today is because, like I said, I've had customers come in over the last couple of weeks, month, and I've seen them using those in their instrument. I didn't say anything to them in face because they were very nice people. They were very wonderful customers, loyal to the channel, etc. and so forth. I didn't want to create any hassle with them, but I'm telling them and you, get rid of the chemical humidifiers. If you feel you have to humidify, use a different method. Don't use the chemical ones. I'm telling you for sure. You will thank me, you'll bless me, because I'm telling you, once you see that mess that it creates inside your instrument, you'll be going, oh, I wish I would have listened to him. And I would appreciate it if somebody in the comments would put in there the problems they've had with those, because I know that somebody out there has had to have that happen to them, because I've seen it too many times. And it makes a mess. It'll destroy the label. It can destroy some of the glue joints. It just makes a mess. I've even seen it leak all the way through the wood and discolor the top of the instrument or the back of the instrument. Yeah, it's bad. So don't use those. If you have to use something to humidify, use something else. Just use plain water on a sponge or whatever you want to do, but don't use the chemical. Okay, I'm off of it. And like I said, try to analyze that and see if there's any reason why I would have a motive to tell you that, other than to try to be helpful. Okay, so there you go. Anyway, the next thing that I had on here was to give you the status of some of the instruments that are in the shop. I thought I had made progress on this Gibson. Not so much. You know, I got everything fixed on it. Everything's fixed on it. It's playable. I could send it back this way. This is vastly improved. This was so caved in here, and there was 3 or 4 braces loose across here. The fret job has been done. You know, there was a crack through here that's been repaired and cleated and all that. So I mean, it's in very good shape, except that this didn't hold. I thought it did. This corner had come unglued. And I tried to glue it back the first time, didn't even hold at all. Second time it seemed like it held, and it did hold until I got full tension on it. And then I only tensioned it up about 5 minutes before we went live, and it went pow, and it came loose. So that gave you some idea how much tension is on a bridge. If there's enough tension to just pull up this one corner, you know, there's a lot of tension going on here. So, yeah. So I'm going to have to do the bad thing and take this whole thing apart and take these metal fasteners out of here, which I didn't want to do. See, it's got these pearl dots here, and that's covering the metal fasteners. And I was really wanting, and he was really wanting to keep this original. But, you know, I can't send it back in good faith with this bridge pulling up like that. It's only going to get worse. It's only going to cause it to crack down through here and all that. So it's got to be fixed. So, as bad as I hate to, I'm going to have to take it apart. The fiddle is, you know, not much different than I showed it yesterday in the vlog, but the sides are all fixed now, and the reason I haven't done any more to it is because I had to glue this back. This piece here was loose, and there's a lot of torque on this also, and I just wanted to give it overnight to dry, and it's been overnight. So today, hopefully, I should be able to get this set up, and this should be going out of the shop. But I just wanted to show you the status of that it's up in pretty good shape, really. And the big project, and it is a big project, is the Larrivee mandolin. Now I think you probably saw a previous vlog where the boys from down at the acoustic shop down in Springfield, Missouri, the Chapmans, brought this up to me, and we're kind of doing a, I should have thought of the word ahead of time. I'm terrible about remembering words. But anyway, we're kind of doing what do you call it? Say it in there, the comments for me. We're working in conjunction, since I can't think of the one word. Anyway, we're working together on a video, and they're going to have their version of the video, and I'll have my version of the video of how we're fixing this broken off neck. The neck was broken clean off. And of course, you can tell it's still broken clean off. But the difference is now I've already started on it, and you can see I've cut a long taper here, and I've cut a long taper here. Now, what I did first, though, in case you would run into this and want to fix it yourself, the problem was this wasn't a clean break across. Now, the J. Ford mandolin I had, it was pretty much a straight across break. It wasn't that big a deal. But this one was real jagged, and it's going to be hard to show you that now, but it's jagged all the way up and through here. And so what I did was I just held the two pieces together, glued them back together with super glue or CA glue, and just held them there, and then, you know, till they set, and then even put more CA glue in there, made sure it was really set well. Then what I did was I just took a razor saw and sawed it straight through. And the reason I did it that way was that way I have a straight cut here to match these back up to. And that way it fills in all the junk that was broken out in here. So all the junk that's broken is up in here. Now you think, well, that'll make it weak. It won't, because I'm putting in a solid piece that's going to span the whole thing. So all the broken junk is just filler. That's really all it is. It's nothing more than just filler, which, you know, instead of using regular wood filler, I used the wood itself as the filler. And so anyway, so now, you know, I'm ready now to make the tapered piece that goes in here, the piece that spans this whole thing, and then it all has to be recarved to the original specs, or original size, I guess you'd say. And you might wonder, well, how do you get that angle right? Because this could go anywhere, right? It could be anywhere. So what I did was, ahead of time, I made a template. And so this template is on the outside. It would go like this. And so approximately like that. It's kind of hard to hold all this. And then, so there you go. So that sets my angle right there, see? So I know what my angle should be based on that. So I made this template ahead of time. I also made the inside template in case I needed it, you know. And so I can put this on here like this. And again, the peg head would match on this as well. And that little cutout you see there is kind of where the bump was, where the two parts met. And so there's a little cutout right there for that. But anyway, again, so I've got two templates to make sure I get the neck angle back. So this mandolin will essentially be original, at least in all senses, other than the fact that it's going to have a big splice in there. In other words, it's going to be just like it was when it came from the factory. But it's quite a job. It really is. You know, as I've mentioned before, the old pucker factor really gets to you when you start taking a bandsaw to something like this. you better kind of know what you're doing, because it'll sure jump up and bite you in the rear end if you're not careful. And fortunately, I think I got lucky. Everything worked just perfectly. And then once I get them cut, then I take them to the belt sander and smooth it off real flat and smooth this off real flat. So I've got two really good flat surfaces now that I can cut an angle piece and made them right up to and glue them down and then just recarve it. The carving part you might think would be the hard part, but for me that's pretty easy. You know, carving a neck is kind of simple, really. I can do that in a couple hours, it'll be done. So anyway, and just for the record, here's the parts that I cut off that you can see there. That's how much I cut off. And I think you can see here in the close-up. Let me lay this down because I'm fumbling with it. In the close-up there, you can probably see how it was broke off right there. See, that's where it was broke off. And that's what I was struggling with, was how am I going to cut this off and make it match back up? So my idea was just glue it back together like it's normal and then make my own intentional cut. And then when I, you know, taper all this off, most of the crud is going to be cut away anyway. So most of the parts that are no good are actually cut away. And so this was off of the neck part. Anyway, that's how I did it, and it's going to work. I'm 100% convinced it'll be perfectly fine when I'm done. I think that's it on all of that stuff. If you have any questions about any of that, feel free to put them in the comments, and make sure you put a few question marks in front of it. And I see some questions already scrolling up the screen. We do have some really good questions today. We've got 14 of them, in fact, or things they want me to comment on, whether they're questions or not is a matter of opinion, I guess. By the way, it is a little cool in the shop. I may actually have to turn on my little heater down below here, and you may hear that. So if I can't handle the coolness, I may do that. I might also just comment that a bunch of people commented on my hornet's nest, and you know, some people were concerned that I took the hornet's nest away and they won't have that for next year. Well, they abandoned the nest. They don't come back to it. And in fact, if you leave them out there over winter, 99% of them will be totally destroyed by next spring. They won't even look like a hornet's nest. You'll just see a little rag thing hanging in the tree. It won't look like a hornet's nest at all. So they don't reuse them next year. So just in case you were concerned about the hornets. The queen is the only one, the way I understand it, the queen is the only hornet that actually survives to next year. And she makes a new nest and makes a whole new colony from scratch. And it's the weirdest thing to me. It's like, why do they go to all that work and none of them survive? You know, it's just, it's a weird thing in nature. That one there blows me away, I think, about as much as any nature fact I've ever heard. Okay, we're about to start on these 14 questions. You better strap in because we got a bunch of them. Got Pepsi this morning, in case you're wondering. Someone asked, how did I lay out the shop? How did I make my decision on laying out the shop? Well, quite truthfully, I don't know that I had any particular master plan. I started with like my table saw, because it's a big thing, and a lot of times you're taking big sheet goods in and out of that, or long pieces that you want to rip or something. So I put that in front of my double garage doors. In other words, it's in the middle of the shop, so I have room on both sides, so I can get an equal length piece on both sides of it. So that's the important thing about the table saw, and so I kind of built around that, and because the table saw kind of rules in a way in your shop. So basically I centered it so that I could get a long piece and even longer, or carry in sheet goods through the garage door right straight to my table saw. So that kind of set my first thing. Then from there I started putting the similar tools in similar places. So I put my bandsaw to the left of it. I put my joiner right next to the table saw. And I put my planer in the center. So all those things are right in the center of the shop. Now, quite honestly, the joiner is a little awkward to use, but you can use it just fine where it's at. It's on wheels, I can roll it out if I need to, but for the most part, and for the most things I'm jointing, it's perfectly fine in the middle of the shop, and if I need to move it out where I need more room, I can roll it. And the same way with my planer. My planer, I don't use it very often at all, but when I need it, I can roll it out and give myself more room. So I put all those things in, those are the four things in the middle. Then from that point, then I'm working around the perimeter. And basically I've got my sanding all along this side here. So I've got this thickness sander, my homemade thickness sander. I have two belt and disc sanders in a row, and I keep those for two different purposes. The big belt sander and the big disc sander I just use for general purpose everything. And then I have a small one that I have it set at a permanent angle for my saddles. For like guitar saddles, I just leave it set at that angle so that all I got to do is walk over there and take the guitar saddle and rotate it across there, because they usually have a radius to the guitar saddles. And so I just kind of swing it across there to cut the bevel in it that I want on the top of that radius, if that makes any sense to you. So I have all my sanding on this one side. Then on the back wall, I have things I don't use that often. I have my wood lathe over in the back far corner. I don't use it that often, but I do use it. I have my buffer next to that. I have a cutoff saw, chop saw, whatever you call it, wood chop saw over there next to that. And then I have a toolbox and tool racks and things. And that's pretty much it on the tools and equipment. Well, I have my drill press over here, and I also have an extra bandsaw over here on the far wall. So, and it's nice to have the two bandsaws too, because like the one, I just keep a small blade on it. So if I really need to cut something detailed or delicate, I can go over to the old bandsaw with the small blade. But otherwise, I do almost everything on the big bandsaw, or the newer bandsaw. They're really the same size. Both of them are 14 inches. But this one here is much more powerful and it just seems bigger. I don't know. It seems like it is anyway. But then I have my drill press over there too, and I have a cabinet right next to my drill press, because there's so many accessories for drill presses. I mean, there's so many bits and so many, things that you just need, at least I do, drill jigs and all kinds of stuff. So I have a cabinet right there next to that too, which is really handy. That's about it. My central vacuum system, I laid that out kind of around. I kind of laid it out based on where I would put the tools. So I kind of put the tools in place, or the machines in place, I guess you'd say. And then I ran, ductwork to each one of them. And my ductwork is just 4-inch PVC. It's the thin wall PVC. And the only thing about that is that it creates a ton of static. And I mean, it will shock the living daylights out of you. So you need to ground it. And so I have a wire wrapped over every bit of my plastic pipe. I have a wire wrapped all the way around it. It grounds it from the I don't know. I ground each end of it. I like the one end here. I'll take it and ground it to like electrical. I have metal boxes, so I'll ground it to the metal box on that one side. And then on the other end, I ground it back to the machine or whatever. And then that's grounded to the electrical box also. And that way it goes directly into the ground, that static. And I don't get shocked at all with this setup, with the grounding. And by the way, that dust collection is also a super safety hazard. It's a fire hazard. That static can actually ignite that dust under certain conditions. It's not real common, but can it happen? Yes, it can happen. And when it explodes, it's just like gunpowder exploding. You don't want to mess with it. So it's a safety thing to ground it too. But seriously, it will just shock the living daylights out of you if you don't ground it. So you got to ground your dust collection system. Okay, so that's my shop layout. That's how I decided it all. I kind of started with my table saw and kind of built around that. And your table saw kind of rules in your shop because it's where you start with your big rough stuff, and you take it down from there. Of course, I realize you can do delicate stuff too, but because of the fact that you do the big bulk stuff there, you need to kind of make room for it first. Someone just asked, how are the fish doing in the new pond? And the truthful answer on that is, it's hard to tell because I think they've all gone to the bottom because it's so cold, and I used to just walk around it and you just see them swimming everywhere. But now you just don't see them. So I think they're down, and there's lots of plant growth in that pond because of the 15-year lag of me working on it. So a lot of stuff grew up in the basin there. And so they've got plenty of cover. They're all down under the cover, it looks like. So I really can't tell you, but I think they're all doing fine because I haven't seen any dead ones. All right, someone wanted to talk about mandolin tailpieces and recommendations. Well, I've used about every kind you can. I really have. I've the stamp cheap metal ones. And when I say that, I mean, that's kind of what Gibson uses is the stamped metal ones. Of course, theirs are a little bit better than your average one you just buy off eBay or something. But they're still stamped metal. I'm not a big fan of the stamped metal ones. Sure, if I had a Lloyd Lorer and it had the stamped metal one on, I'd keep it on there because that would be original. But if I have the option of picking one, I'm going to pick one that's either a cast one or a machined one out of solid material, so that it's not the little thin stuff. That the general rule of thumb is that the more weight you have in your tailpiece and the more weight you have in your headstock. General rule of thumb, you understand. Everything can be taken to an extreme and then it's too much. But the general rule of thumb is a heavier tailpiece and a heavier headstock will give you more sustain. It's the solidness of it. It lets it vibrate better. For instance, I don't know if this example will be a good example or not, but like say if you drop a quarter on something hard and stiff like a hardwood floor or a concrete floor, you're going to hear it really loud. You drop it on something like paper or you drop it on carpet or something, you're not going to hear it. It's the solidness, it's the sustaining factor is what you want. So you want a good solid tailpiece if you have the choice. I mean, if you're buying an instrument and it comes with a stamped metal one, I wouldn't not buy the instrument just because of that, but you might consider changing it if you wanted to improve the sound a little bit. And I'll tell you that the biggest thing about tailpieces for me is how easy they are to use. Some of them that look like they'd be really easy to use are kind of a pain in the neck. And where the difference is there is how you put the string in. If you have to run it through a hole and do some different things, some of those are pretty complicated. And so for me, the one I have standardized on is and I had the name until I had to say it. It's the James tailpiece. I standardized on the James tailpiece, and you can get that off of the internet. Trying to think of the name of the website, but I can't. it's like Axiom or something like that, I think is the name of it. Axiom, I believe, and I think they're out of Oklahoma. But the James tailpiece is where it's at for me because it looks like the traditional, but it's machined out of a solid piece of brass, and it's a heavier tailpiece, and the function of it is so good. It's got the lid clicks down and closes because there's some O-rings in there, and it closes against those O-rings and holds it tight. Plus, those O-rings dampen the vibration of the strings. So it's really a very well thought out, very well made tailpiece. It's the James tailpiece. The Monteleone style tailpieces are my second favorite tailpieces. I used to use those exclusively until the James tailpiece came out. But anyway, those are both real good tailpieces. Those are the ones I prefer. Some of the tailpieces that look like they'd be really good to use are fine acoustically, but they're a pain in the neck to put the strings on. I want to say Weber is one of them. Those drive me crazy. I think it's Weber. I shouldn't say one unless I'm positive. But the ones where you have to slide them up through there and then you have to bend the string down and hook the loop on the peg, those are hard to do sometimes. They're really complicated, especially if you got sore hands. So anyway, you might want to think about that. So heavier is better in general. Let's see. One-piece top guitar. What are the pros and cons? Have I ever built a one-piece top? And the answer to that is I don't think so. I don't think I ever did. I think all the original ones I built were all basically two-piece tops. I guess I'd be flying in the face of Stradivari if I said a single piece top would be just as good. But on the other hand, I don't think you would notice much difference, to be truthful. I think if you used a solid one, if you had a board that wide, first of all, it'd be kind of hard to find one. But if you had a board as wide as a guitar top, I don't think it would be a bad thing. The idea of the two-piece top on anything, whether it's a violin, mandolin, or guitar, is the symmetry of sound. In other words, the tree grew like this. You opened it up. Now the rings, you can pretend my fingers are the growth rings. So now they're like that. So you got a matching set from one side to the other, except my fingers are different lengths. No, but you have it. So it's book matched. And so you have symmetry of sound spreading out from the middle out. That's the idea behind Stradivari, is that idea. Do I really think most people could hear the difference, whether it was that way or whether it's just one large piece? No, I don't really think many people could hear the difference. And I think you'd probably be just fine with a single piece if that's what you wanted to do. But on the other hand, I guess I'd have to ask, why do you want to do that? Why don't you just make it the other way? So anyway, that's my take on it. Antler, bone, fossil, ivory. What are my takes on that? Well, I've kind of covered this in the past a couple times, but antler, bone are almost the same. Why do I use antler over bone? Because antler is ready to use as soon as you harvest the deer or as soon as you find the antler. Bone is not. Bone, you kind of have to cure it or, let it cure because it will smell, it will rot. I mean, it's just, bone is not ready to use right out of the animal if you stop and think about it. So that's the reason I use antler. That's the main reason. Well, that's one of the main reasons. There's about three main reasons. The next main reason is because it's really hard to find a piece of bone large enough to make the deer antler saddles for a mandolin. So, believe it or not, as small as that is, it's still hard to find a piece of bone thick enough to make that. Most of the bone inside of a cow has too much marrow in it, and it's a really thin wall, believe it or not. It's thinner. It's thick, maybe thicker than a human, but it's still not as thick as that. So that's the other reason I use antler. And even with that, most antler is still porous enough where you can see one side here has porosity, the other side is solid. So, Even with antler, I have that problem. Sometimes on some antler, they're solid all the way through, but it depends on the antler. So that's the difference between the antler and the bone. Now, the fossilized ivory, to be truthful, I don't know that much about it, but if it were really, truly fossilized versus the marketing hype, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about marketing hype, fossilized ivory. Trust me, if it was fossilized, it would be stone, and you wouldn't want to use stone. So it's ivory. It's not fossilized ivory. And so ivory is frowned upon, of course, but it's also legal as long as it's, a certain age or it's found a certain way and proven all that and the provenance and all that stuff that you have to go through on all that. I don't know anything about it, to be truthful. But I just know ivory's really hard. It would probably be one of your better sounds, but then it could be right on the edge of being harsh too. So I don't know that much about ivory, to be truthful. I'm just being honest with you because, there's no point in blowing smoke. But just the marketing hype is what drives me crazy. Fossilized ivory. It's not fossilized ivory. It's just ivory. It's old ivory. It may be prehistoric ivory, but it's not fossilized. Okay. Off that kick. How do you dye a burst top with maple binding? Well, I've done that a few times on the channel. The way I do it is I dye the top before I put the binding on it because you cannot keep it off there. And even doing it that way, you'll still have some issues with it. So that's how I do it. I just dye the top first and then put the binding on. And if you're using really curly maple, just good luck with that. That stuff wants to break just by looking at it. Okay, now here's where I probably will get off on my little rant here. Applying boiled linseed oil to a distressed finish. Someone in the comments said that they suggested they put linseed oil on a distress finish on the back of a Martin guitar, and they just got all kinds of flack about that, and all kinds of that's wrong. You can't do that. That's problematic. Well, first of all, the reason it's a problem is because you're talking to a forum, and I'm telling you right now. 80% of the people on the forums really couldn't find their butt with both hands if they had a map tattooed on their chest. And that's pretty much my feelings on most forums. I'm not going to name any forums, but there's a couple of that really bug me big time. Because they get, maybe that person leading that forum or the one that's got the biggest, loudest voice, maybe he's a great musician. Maybe he's picked up a tip here and a tip there. But he hasn't spent 40 years building and repairing instruments for the most part. Most of the time, it's just somebody who thinks they know stuff. And that's really about the bottom line. That's where I have a problem with forums. Let me just say it this way. If you want to put linseed oil on a distressed finish, in other words, if it's a finish that's basically hardly there, you can wipe it down with linseed oil and then wipe it off. I'm not saying coat it with linseed oil and leave it. I'm not saying that. You put it on and you wipe it off. It will make it look 10 times better instantly. And it is also good for the bare wood. There is nothing wrong with it whatsoever. I don't care what the smartest guy on that forum says. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Period. End of discussion. If he feels that's a problem, like I said, he couldn't find his butt with both hands if he had a map tattooed on his chest. There you go. You want to know how I really feel about it? Let's see. Moving right along. This is a really good question and a really common problem. The strings are clicking as I tune them. Well, here again, this is another forum myth. If you go on a forum, they're going to tell you that this string file should be the same as the gauge of your string. And I'm here to tell you That's a bunch of hogwash. You want to make your slot just a little bit bigger than your string. You don't have to make it 20 thousandths bigger. You just need to make it a few thousandths bigger than your string. If your string is a 56, then maybe a 58 would be perfect. Or you can use a 56, but wallow it out a little bit, just a little bit. You don't have to wallow it out a lot, just a little bit. You don't want your string pinched in your groove. If you get your string pinched in that groove, you've got a problem. And one of the problems will be it popping as you're tuning. If you're hearing that popping as you're tuning, your string is generally pinched in the slot. Now, it can be something else. It can be, it generally happens on your bassier strings because they got the serving around them. Of course, you don't generally hear the popping when you're on your treble strings because they don't have any wrapping around them. But like on your bass string where the largest wrap is, it can also be like if you really had some kind of a sharpness or something in your nut there and it's bouncing over that, or maybe you had some kind of a bump in there and it's bouncing over that, well, that could cause it too. But in general, you just want to make sure that the slot is very smooth, the angle is consistent, and it's wider than your string. You do not want them the width of your string or smaller, especially you don't want them smaller. It does not hurt to have them even 5 thousandths bigger than your string. It won't hurt one thing, and you won't even be able to tell it. That's the other thing. You think you could, but you won't be able to tell it. Even if you look at it, it's that close. 5 thousandths is nothing. So if you got a couple thousandths on either side, you can't even hardly see that. So make your slots bigger than your string, and you will thank me, you will bless me. Trust me, that's the way to go. The only other thing you can do if you're hearing those clickings things and you can't figure out anything else is just to put graphite in there. Take your pencil lead and line your slot with pencil. Because like if it's a soft material, I definitely have heard this on plastics. I've even heard it on some bone because there'll be places in bone or even antler that's soft. And the string will bite into that and then it jerks over that. So, the graphite will help with that. And if you really do have a soft piece there, then your best bet is to replace it. And at second best would be to coat it with CA glue and let that harden really good and then smooth that back out. And then coat it with graphite. So anyway, those are all the kinds of things that can cause that popping and jerking when you're tuning. And you definitely want to fix that. StewMac uke kit with 2 dowels. Should I use a dovetail? Someone was going to make a uke out of a StewMac kit, and apparently it comes with 2 dowels rather than a dovetail joint. Well, if I was building one from scratch, I'll just tell you for sure I'd probably use a dovetail joint. But also knowing what I know about them, ukes don't have that much pressure on their necks. You'd probably be fine with with the dowel pins as long as you make a really good connection. You got a real flat surface, your back of your neck is really flat, they mate together perfectly, you glue them with tight bond, and you were able to clamp it and hold it for, at least 24 hours. And I would even recommend maybe longer for that kind of a purpose. You might want to wait 2 or 3 days and just let the glue cure really well. Then I don't think you'll have any problem. So, but make sure there's no air in there. If there's any air in there, it's not going to hold very well. But on a uke kit, they don't have that much tension on the neck compared to your steeled string instruments and things, generally speaking. Let's see. Someone wanted me to talk about string size and types of strings and phosphor bronze and why to use each thing. I'm going to turn my heater on just a little bit here. Okay, hopefully that's not too loud. The strings You know, I used to be a proponent of always using medium strings on guitars, but I really have changed my opinion on that over the years. And I really am a proponent of using light strings most of the time. I'm not saying you have to use light strings. I'm just saying that my preference is actually to use light strings on most instruments now. If they're made really heavy, if the bracing's really heavy, yeah, then you probably really do want to use medium strings. But if you look inside there and you got scallop bracing and it's really light looking bracing, I think light strings are your way to go. I really do. It's going to save a lot on your instrument, and they vibrate just fine. And like I said again, in a blind test, do I think very many people could tell the difference? Not very many. Not very many at all. So I would go with light strings if you can. You'd be surprised. The string technology has improved so much that the light strings sound great. The next thing is about the material. And I do happen to know something about this because, like I said, that's what Rose's String Works really came from. Was I used to sell strings. And I used to sell a lot of strings. And I sold them pretty much all over the world. But the differences in material, and there's a ton of materials. It's kind of like jewelry. You know, some people can wear gold and be fine, and other people cannot. Some people can wear silver, and some people cannot. It's kind of the same way with your string material. You kind of need to experiment. I would say the average person, 80% of the people will do really well with phosphor bronze. They seem to work great. Standard bronze, not so much. Standard bronze just tarnishes, turns bad, no time at all. Phosphor bronze lasts a long time for most people. Some people would be better off, though, with nickel strings, even though you might think, well, they don't sound that good. And on a guitar, I don't think they necessarily do. On a mandolin, I actually think nickel strings can sound pretty good if you get the right gauges and things. So you might have to experiment with the different material for you to see what you think lasts the longest. Now, there's all those cryogenics and coated strings and all those other marketing hype things. And I'm not going to argue the fact that some of them do what they say. They do last longer. But I think the price you're paying on that, first of all, they cost more. So that's one of the prices you're paying. But the other price you're paying is that they typically don't sound to me as good on day one as the phosphor bronze does. Now, maybe on day 20, they'll sound, maybe if you play a lot, maybe on day 20, they'll sound better than the phosphor bronze. So it's kind of a trade-off. So it's just, you just have to experiment and you just kind of have to make up your own mind on strings and things because there is a lot of choices. But in general, I would go lighter rather than heavy. Now, and that's true until you get into hard driving bluegrass where you want to be heard. Then maybe you're medium and maybe you're, a little slightly heavier medium strings on your mandolin too, if you're trying to be heard, So there's some trade-offs. I'm not hard and fast on any of that. I just want you to understand. I'm just giving you some general guidelines and some things maybe to think about. Okay, moving on from strings, moving on from strings, we've got someone asked, what about corian for a bridge? That stuff they make counters out of. I've used it. I don't know that I've actually made a bridge with it. I've used it for the points, for the body points here and things like that on a mandolin. I've used the material. My impression would be that it would probably be a little brittle for a saddle on a guitar. I kind of think you would see chips and kind of think you would have a problem with it, though I've never used it, so I don't really know that for sure. That's just my impression. It would probably sound okay, but kind of like all man-made materials, at least the ones that I've heard, they sound okay, but they don't sound as good as antler or bone, in my opinion. That's just me. Do I have a light on my router when I'm using it? Well, I didn't used to. But that wonderful fellow over in Europe built me this thing, and it is wonderful. I mean, this base is wonderful. And it has a LED light. You can't really see it, but there's an LED light up in here, and it shines down on this hole. And I can plug it into electrical outlet, and then I just plug it in right back here like this. As a matter of fact, I'll just show you. So yeah, it lights right up, see, just like that. Really works great. Yeah, I definitely recommend a light on your router if you can. I didn't have any good way to do that before until I got this. I am spoiled. That's just killer. It changes everything, really. I can't thank the guy enough that built this for me. It's just awesome. I love this thing. And I'd call his name if I could, but you know me and names. I can't remember names. I can't even introduce my band. So don't expect me to remember someone's name from 3 or 4 years ago that I only, knew when I got the bass. But it doesn't keep me from loving that bass. That guy did a wonderful job. I love that thing. It's just killer. I wish you all could have one too. And he probably should go into business and sell them, and I'll be his ambassador. I'll be his sales rep here in the U.S. and tell you all about them and how good they are for free. Why do I consider a zero fret inferior? Well, I might have used those words or slipped and said something like that, but I don't really necessarily consider them inferior. That's not that's probably the wrong message if that's what I've said in the past. And I say if because I don't remember everything I say on these things. I got 1,200 videos out there, so it's hard to remember. Do I prefer a zero fret? No, I don't really. And why? Mostly just because of tradition, and I just don't. I typically see them on cheaper instruments, so I associate them with being cheap. Now, back up the truck and listen to me here and hear me when I say this, because this is the truth. There's nothing wrong with a zero fret in terms of mechanically speaking, or in terms of sound, or in terms of playability. In fact, the zero fret is probably the easiest way to do it all. You'll get your, the intonation really is set at the other end anyway, but it won't hurt your intonation. So you drive in your zero fret, as long as you drive it in the proper place, of course. And the thing about that is that it will automatically set your action at your first fret. It's automatic. You don't even have to do anything. It's just done already. And so from that standpoint, the zero fret is the easiest way you can go. And it's just fine. I don't have anything really negative to say about a zero fret. It's just that I don't prefer them. I prefer doing it the traditional way, the hard way. And it really is the hard way, I have to admit. But it's the looks, and like I said, I've always seen them on cheap, inexpensive instruments. I don't really recall any high-end instruments that have them. I'm sure some do. So you don't have to get on me and tell me that such and so uses them on their high-end instrument. That's fine. It's just not my preference. That's all there is. I don't mean to say it's inferior, because it's not really inferior. Okay, hope that cleared that up. Mandolin neck angle fixtures and holding while you're cutting, etc. Well, I don't have any real, insight into this because I got most of the stuff I do from the Siminoff's book, Roger Siminoff. Most everything I do on building my mandolins, I learned from his book. Now, I have modified it over the years. I don't get his book out and look at it anymore. I haven't looked at his book in, I don't know, 15 or 20 years, really, at least seriously. I have gotten it out once or twice to try to remember something, but I don't really use his book to build my mandolins anymore. But I learned my process and my techniques from there. And one of the things I learned was to build this little deal, and this is really handy. You know, you can imagine this, just the neck being clamped in here. So this would just be the neck and just the peg head like this. And it's clamped on there. And you would have to imagine that it's a large flat piece of wood here because you haven't cut the profile yet. This is for cutting the profile. So you can put a clamp on here and a clamp on here, and then you can go to your saw and cut one side of the profile. Then you move your clamp on the other side, and then you cut the other side of the profile. And what this does is, because this is flat here, you're cutting the angle into the, you know, like if you look at this, this is not cut square. See how it's cut at an angle? Well, that jig will let you cut this angle. So, you know, in other words, it's not squared off at a 90 here. So this jig right here helps you do that. And again, that came from Roger Siminoff's book, the original book. I don't know if it's in his current book, but it was in the original book. Another thing for setting the angle of the neck, this was in his original book too, or something similar to this. It may not look just like this. But I used to have this piece floating kind of like a bridge, and you can move it around. But I realized that it's pretty much always in the same place, so I finally just glued it down to this board. Now this board's actually got a little bit of a cup in it, but I always clamp this board down to the edge of a heavy workbench, and I clamp both ends of it down so that it's perfectly flat. And then basically, and I can't do it really well here because this is glued on there, taped on there, but basically you just set it on here like this. And so this, your top of your mandolin rests on this, and this flat here without the fingerboard, you know, that's how you actually set the angle then. So the angle is set with that. So that's how I set the angle, and so therefore all the angles are always the same on my mandolins. So it works out really good. And you have to get this height proper so that your bridge height will be the right height. And because you don't have your fretboard on there and everything, it's critical how tall this is. I'll tell you how tall this one is, and it works for me. Let me see here if I can get my calipers out here. They were where they're supposed to be for a change. All right, I'll try to tell you how tall this is here in the middle. Okay, on the neck side of this, because this is tapered, by the way, to match the taper in the top. On the neck side, it's 431 in the middle. Let me just check that again. Yeah, 430. So just call it 430. And on the back side, it's on the tailpiece side, it's about 475. So 430 to 475. There's an angle there. You know, that way it just kind of matches the angle of the top setting on here like that. You can kind of imagine that. But, and then this little cutout is for the scroll, because the scroll has to, you know, my scrolls often are proud of the fretboard, or they can be. So that little cutout there is for that. You may not need that. I also very lightly drew in pencil lines to keep it, so I keep the neck straight on here, you know, and the measurement, well, I don't even know if I could tell you that. I don't know if that is going to make sense. I was going to tell you how far back this is, but basically this is about where your bridge is setting. So you just had to figure that out on your own, I guess. But anyway, that's another neck jig I use. And then finally, for drilling the holes, now this is probably as important as anything. You know, the first several mandolins I made, I didn't have a jig like this. I just kind of did it by measurement and by eye and, catch as catch can. But I bought the StuMac drill guide, and I used that for a long time, and that works really good. You should have a drill guide for drilling your tuning peg holes, because if you don't, your pegs are going to be bound up and they're not going to turn very easy. This keeps them turning really easy. They slide in without any friction, and therefore they'll turn easy. And so then this was good for a while, but it's still kind of a pain because you got to line it up on one side, line it up on the other side. So I said, why mess with that? Just make myself a full-fledged guide. So this is a fairly thick piece. It's probably a 1-inch thick piece, about the same thickness as this drill guide. And it's out of hard maple, and I can clamp it down right here, and I can clamp it down right here. And then I can, generally I can drill all the holes at once without having to take this off. And they line up really good with this. In other words, I used this to make this. So, so I know the holes are right. And it works really good. I've used it a bunch of times. So anyway, I would definitely recommend a drill guide if you're going to drill your peg holes. That's one of the most important things, because otherwise they never turn good. I see that on handmade instruments all the time. They just don't turn well, and you don't want that. I think that's the last question, and we're probably about out of time because there were so many. But there's a lot of questions scrolled up here, so I'll try to get a few of them and see if we can. And if I miss you, sorry, I'm just scrolling kind of in a hurry trying to find them here. What's your opinion of carbon fiber bridge plates? I don't know enough about it, Jason, to tell you. Jason O'Neill asked that question. A carbon fiber bridge plate. I think my first problem would be the kind of glue you have to use to make it stick. If it's epoxy, I don't want nothing to do with it. So there you go. I am not an epoxy fan in any way, shape, or form, just so you understand. Scott Roberts, will a chemical humidifier work in my CPAP machine? Yeah, well, it might work one night. You won't need it the next night. Andrew Keppel, good morning. Would you oil a maple fretboard, and if so, what would Jerry use? Yeah, I would oil a maple fretboard. I don't think that'd be... Well, it really depends. Most maple fretboards I've seen have got a finish on them. So if it's got a finish on it, oiling it is kind of almost a moot point, really. You don't really need to do it. But if it's a bare wood, then for sure I would oil it. And probably for maple, I probably would lean toward the Be Good oil. Because it's got a beeswax built into this. This is an expensive thing. This is about $20 for this, but it lasts forever. I couldn't even tell you how many fretboards I've used that on, and Caleb used it on just as many too. I mean, he used it a bunch, and still got some left in there. So anyway, the point is I'd probably use that for the maple. My second choice, and it would still be a good choice, would probably be just plain old boiled linseed oil. Wipe it on, wipe it off. You'd be fine. Do bone bridge pins help the tone and sustain of a guitar? Well, there's a lot of talk about that, and the truth of the matter is I haven't studied it enough to know for sure. I suspect that the difference would be very minimal. Now, if you go to brass, I think you'll hear that. That's pretty harsh, but I'm not a big fan of the brass pins, and I know people, can hear the difference, and therefore they like it. They like to hear that difference. The problem is just different doesn't necessarily make it better, And so I don't know that I'd notice the difference in those types of materials, but if you go from one extreme to another, then you'll hear it for sure. And I'm not crazy about the brass pins or anything. So David Thorpe asked that question about the bridge pins, and so the truth is, David, I don't have enough comparison. I haven't done a before and after on all those things to tell me which one would be better. But to me, it's more like a problem that I don't seem to have, so I don't need to fix it. You know what I'm saying? I will say this, David, that I would use a solid material. I lean towards, a solid whatever, not a lightweight anything. The solid always seems to give more sustain, so I'd use solid, not necessarily heavy, but solid. And I think you'll do just fine. Moving down through here, Jesse Burge, do you have a hard time keeping tools put up away while you're working? Yeah, I do, Jesse. I'll get things scattered. I've kind of made it my practice before I start the next instrument to put everything away. I mean, I just kind of do that as a black and white. Before I put the next instrument on the bench, I put all the tools that are on the bench away. That's just the way I do it. So, and that helps a lot. It keeps things basically put away. Scattered out through the shop, not necessarily all the time, I'll be honest, but I try to. Chip Wood. Chip's been around for a long, long time too. I've seen his name for a long time, so thanks for hanging in there, Chip. Since you don't take any more commissions on custom instruments, would you recommend a luthier to build a mandolin within a 500-mile radius? The truth is, Chip, I don't know one to build you one. I'm trying to think if that's true or not. I don't think I know one that sorry, I just don't think I know one that builds mandolins within 500 miles. I'm sure there are some. I just don't know who they are. I kind of stick to myself, man. I don't get out on the forums. I don't do any of that. Mainly because I've been burned too many times. It's just not the life I want to live. Daniel Schaefer. Jerry, I've got a short scale guitar. Should I tune it to A? The strings are too loose when tuned to E. What do you think? Well, there again, Daniel, I don't have a whole lot of expertise in that area. I'm sure people on this internet here would be, or in the comments would be able to give you a better explanation of that one than me. I truly don't know. I'd tell you if I did. So I'm just going to say I don't know. Yeah, the guy made a comment here that I don't know how to pronounce his name. Matafuko isn't fossil stone. Yes, that's why I say it's just hype when they call it fossilized ivory. It's just hype. It's a marketing hype thing. You're using fossilized ivory. It's like, no, you're using ivory. You can call it fossilized if you want to, but it's ivory. Because if you were using fossilized ivory, you would know it. It would be a rock, Bill Webb. And Bill's been here many times. Good to see you in the comments, Bill. How do you really feel about ivory? Well, I don't think I have a real problem with it. It's the marketing hype around it. It's what I have a problem with. As I said, I don't have really any experience with it. I know it's hard. It's really, really hard. And, I think I've shown it before, but in that box right up there, someone gave me a big chunk of fossilized ivory elephant tusk. It's not. It's just ivory elephant tusk. But apparently it was grandfathered before the ban and all that stuff, and they said maybe I could use it. Well, the truth is it's so dang hard, I don't want to mess with it. It's just too hard to, it's just going to dull my saws and stuff, and I just don't want to mess with it. Where cutting deer antler or cutting bone on a wood bandsaw, it doesn't hurt the teeth at all. You can cut bone all day long and then go right back to your wood and you're just fine. But I don't think you can do that with ivory. I'm pretty sure you're going to ruin your bandsaw blade. Let's see. Scott Roberts. Speaking of forums and such, I couldn't agree more. The same applies to a lot of YouTube videos, not yours. Well, yeah, I mean, at least I hope you guys understand that I try not to blow smoke. I mean, I really do. If I know something, I tell you. You know, I tell you what I think, but it's just what I think. It doesn't necessarily make it 100%, but that's what I think. But when I don't know anything about the subject, I'd rather just say I don't know anything about the subject. And I hope that comes across. I hope you agree with that. I'm looking for more question marks. It looks like there's a few more down here. Kenneth Innes, I hope I didn't pass somebody up. Kenneth Innes says, what would you do if a customer came in for repairs, then stuck around to tell you how to do the repair? Well, contrary to the way you may think I am, I pretty much lay it down like it is. You know, if a guy starts telling me how I'm going to do the job, then I say, well, you know, you seem to understand it better than me. Why don't you just take it and go do it? That's pretty much what I would tell him. Mike Saba says, why is it that you can remember words to hundreds of songs, but you can't remember someone's name? It happens to me all the time. I think you more focused on the person than the name. Yeah, I don't know. This isn't an old age thing with me. This has been my whole life. I have never been able to remember people's names. I have never been able to remember like song titles. You know, like somebody will say, "What's the name of that song?" And I go, "I don't know." You know, like I'll start to say, "Okay, this is going to be in G," and they'll say, "What is it?" And I go, "I don't know." You know, I can't remember the darn titles. I can't remember names. Those things apparently are stored slightly differently than other things are stored. And I don't have that space. I mean, I apparently have the space, but it's used differently. You know, that's all I can think of because there's something different about it. Like remembering words to songs, man. Sometimes I never even have to write them down even the first time to sing the whole song, you know? I don't know. It's crazy. It is a funny thing about memory. Dean Barnes says, how about a quick Christmas song right now? Well, I think that's going to be that last thing, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. I don't have a good mandolin in the shop today. All I've got here is this 3/4 size. Could I do it on the guitar? Maybe, but I'd probably screw it up. I'm not that... I can play almost anything on a guitar, but I generally would need to practice it first. Look at this. This is the little 3/4 size mandolin. It's got the little kid strap on it. I can't even get it over one shoulder. It's not perfect tuning, but it's close enough. It's close enough for my singing. All right, so let's just do one Christmas song, and then we'll call it good. Sleigh bells ring, are you listening? In the lane, snow's glistening. A beautiful sight, we're happy tonight, walking in a winter wonderland. Gone away is the bluebird, here to stay is the new bird. He sings a love song as we stroll along, walking in a winter wonderland. In the meadow we can build a snowman and pretend that he is Parson Brown. He'll say, are you married? We'll say, no, man. But you can do the job if you're in town. Later on, we'll conspire as we dream by the fire. We'll face unafraid the plans that we made, walking in a winter wonderland. Yes, we'll face unafraid the plans that we made, walking in a winter wonderland. This is a 3/4 size F-style mandolin that I built. I built it for a child years ago. Her name was Allison, as you can see her name right in there. The story is, and she played it on stage for years and did a real good job with it. But the story is the family basically went bankrupt and they were selling everything they owned, and they called me and asked me if I would be interested in buying the mandolin back, and so I went and I bought it back. And I haven't turned it loose since. It's a really nice little mandolin. It's a 3/4 size, so it's big enough that I can still play it. And the very first night that I built it, I took it to a jam thinking, well, I'm just going to novelty play it for a couple of minutes and then I'll put it away. I played it the whole evening. It plays really good, sounds really good, got a really good sound and everything. It takes a little, I missed that one chord going to E because it's smaller scale and I went too far, so it takes a little while to get used to it. But once you're used to it, it's just like any other mandolin, But it's a nice little mandolin. See, this has the Monteleone tailpiece. Now, here, let me show you the difference. I talked about the tailpiece before, like poking them through a hole. It's a pain in the neck. It's not on this kind of tailpiece because you can poke it through this hole and then you just set it down on the peg. But those ones where, like, you poke it through the hole and then you have to bend it down and get it on those are a pain in the neck. So if you see one like that, that's totally different. Where you can just poke it through the hole like this and then just set it down on the peg, no problem at all. So these kind of tailpieces are great, and they're solid and heavy duty tailpieces. So I like the Monteleone, I like the James tailpiece, and that's pretty much the end of the story. Well, that's going to be about it, guys. Great song, what's the name of that? You just did that to be me, didn't you? I think that's called Winter Wonderland, I think is what it's called. But I could be wrong on that too. So anyway, yes, smart aleck. Thank you all for joining me this morning. We'll see you probably Monday. Y'all have a good one.